Hello mga kababayan na nandito sa Melbourne. I just wanted to come on here and thank every single one of you for your support.
To the Filipino fans and to just fans in general who have been following my journey, I just want to say thank you so much. It means
She couldn't hold back tears. Alex Eala's emotional moment with a fan. Nobody prepared for what happened after the last ball dropped in Doha. Not the thousands of fans packed inside that stadium. Not the broadcast crew. Not the security team standing at courtside. And certainly not Alexandra Eala herself. Because what unfolded in those quiet, devastating minutes after the final point was not a tennis story anymore. It was something far more human than that. It was the kind of moment that stops you mid-scroll, makes you put your phone down, and reminds you exactly why sport exists in the first place. And by the time it was over, there was not a dry eye in the Khalifa International Tennis Complex. Stay with me, because if you think you already know this story, I promise you, you don't have to truly understand the weight of what happened in Qatar. You have to understand what Alexandra Eala has been carrying. This is not a girl with potential anymore. That chapter is closed. What has replaced it is something far more complicated and far more compelling. The story of a 20-year-old woman from the Philippines who climbed so fast and so high that the entire world started watching and the entire nation started praying. Just weeks before the Qatar Total Energies Open, Eala hit a career-high ranking of world number 40. For most players, that is just a number. For Eala, for the Philippines, for every Southeast Asian kid who ever picked up a racket and wondered if someone who looked like them could ever compete at this level, that number was everything. Back in Manila, people weren't just celebrating. They were painting murals. They were trending hashtags. They were raising flags. She had become more than an athlete. She had become proof. And the 2025 season gave them every reason to believe. She stunned Iga Swiatek, the Polish powerhouse who had dominated women's tennis for years, in a victory so electric that Filipino fans were celebrating in the streets at midnight. She then dismantled Madison Keys with the kind of fearless, controlled aggression that made seasoned commentators scramble for words. She made the semifinals of the Miami Open and sent shockwaves through the rankings so loud that coaches across the entire tour started building specific game plans just for her. Think about that. She went from being the player no one knew to the player everyone was preparing for. But here is the thing about success at that level. It changes the game. When you are unknown, you play with freedom. When you are known, you play with consequence. And by the time Alexandra Eala stepped onto the court in Doha, she was not a surprise anymore. She was a target. The conditions in Qatar offered absolutely no mercy. The desert wind that swept through the Khalifa International Tennis Complex that evening was relentless and completely unpredictable, the kind of wind that doesn't just affect your shots, it dismantles your mind. Balls dipped without warning. Serves shifted mid-flight. The rhythm that professional athletes spend a lifetime building was being torn apart gust by gust. And for Eala specifically, whose left-handed forehand is built entirely on precision, timing, and explosive whip across the court, this was the worst possible environment. That weapon lives and dies on rhythm. And the desert wind kept stealing it point by point, game by game. Her opponent wasn't a household name, but she was exactly the kind of draw you fear in conditions like these. Gritty, consistent, a natural counterpuncher who got stronger the more chaotic things became. It was in almost every way the worst possible matchup at the worst possible moment. From the very first game, something felt off, not to the casual viewer. On the surface, Eala looked composed, locked in, ready, but to trained eyes, to the coaches watching from her box, to the fans who had followed her every match through 2025, the margins were wrong. The forehand was landing inches shorter than it should. The serve was drifting. The footwork, usually electric, usually one of her greatest weapons, was half a step behind. And when that final point slipped away, what the world witnessed was not the quiet, contained grief that broadcasts politely cut away from. What happened was something raw, something real. Her shoulders shook in waves she could not control. She buried her face in a towel, and the sound that the courtside microphones captured. That sound was not the sound of losing a tennis match. It was the sound of 20 years of training, of early mornings and missed birthdays, of sacrificed teenage memories and endless overnight flights and anonymous hotel rooms, all crashing to the surface at once. In that moment, she was not world number 40. She was not a national symbol or a WTA headline. She was a 20-year-old woman who had given absolutely everything she had and discovered that on this particular night, everything was not enough. The Filipino fans inside the stadium fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Cameras caught hands covering mouths, couples leaning into each other, a father pulling his teenage daughter close, someone in the upper rows openly wiping tears. The grief in that arena felt communal, shared, and almost sacred, the kind of collective emotional experience that sport creates when it strips away every layer of performance and leaves only truth. Security personnel exchanged uncertain glances. They were trained for disruptions, for danger, for chaos. Not for this, not for heartbreak. The chair umpire looked down from the elevated seat with quiet, helpless sympathy. There was no protocol in any tournament handbook for what was unfolding in that corner of the court. The background music stopped mattering. The PA announcements faded. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath, as if it understood that something deeply human was happening in real time, and the only respectful response was silence. And then, something that no one saw coming, from the lower tier of the stands, a small figure began moving. The television cameras, scanning the crowd for reactions, caught it almost by accident. And once they did, they could not look away. It was a child, no more than 10 years old, slight and small, wearing an oversized t-shirt with Eala's face printed across the front. But it wasn't the shirt that made every single security officer at that barrier hesitate. It was the crutches. Her right leg was locked inside a thick medical brace, heavily bandaged, the kind of serious hardware that tells a story of real pain and recent injury. She descended the steep lower tier steps with the kind of slow, deliberate focus of someone who had already learned exactly how unforgiving a single misstep could be. Click, swish, step. Click, swish, step. The sound formed a quiet, measured rhythm in the silence of the arena. And she did not stop. She did not hesitate. She did not look for permission. She moved with the kind of uncomplicated, unshakable certainty that only a child possesses, the absolute conviction that what she was about to do was necessary, and nothing in the world was going to stop her. The security team looked at the girl, then at each other, then at the corner of the court where Alex Eala was still folded into her grief, completely unaware of what was approaching. Every regulation said stop her. Every protocol demanded it. But rule books are written for order, not for moments like this. And the people holding those rule books were human beings. Something about the sight of that small, determined, injured child moving toward a young woman who so clearly needed comfort reached past every layer of training and procedure and touched something deeper. So they stepped aside. They let her through. And in doing so, they made a choice that will almost certainly outlive every routine shift they ever worked. The crutches tapped softly against the acrylic surface of the court. In the cathedral silence of the arena, even that faint sound carried. Eala sensed movement and slowly lifted her tear-streaked face from behind the towel. Her eyes were swollen. Her expression was confusion wrapped around heartbreak as she tried to process why a child was standing a few feet away from her on a professional tennis court in the middle of Qatar. The girl paused. She looked at her idol with the kind of wide-open, unfiltered love that children carry before the world teaches them to hide it. Then she leaned her crutches gently against the wall, balanced on her one good leg, and with visible, quiet effort, lowered herself to her knees on that hard court. And she reached out her small arms and wrapped them around Eala's neck. For a split second, Eala froze. And then instinct took over completely. Her arms wrapped around the girl's waist. She pulled her close and pressed her face into the child's shoulder. The sobbing that had begun to quiet came back, but it had changed. These were not the same tears. The earlier ones were born of defeat and exhaustion and the crushing weight of expectation. These new tears carried something else entirely, something warmer. Grief was giving way to connection, right there in front of thousands of witnesses who would never forget what they were seeing. Then the girl reached into the pocket of her oversized t-shirt and pulled out a small medal, tarnished edges, a frayed red ribbon tied, and untied. So many times the knot had become permanent. Not a WTA trophy, not a Grand Slam prize, a school tournament medal, the kind a child wins at a local junior competition and then pins above her bed and touches before falling asleep every night. She had carried it all the way to Qatar. She held it out and said, with a voice that was steady and clear and completely unwavering, "I won this in my school tournament just before I got hurt. I kept it for you. I told myself that when I met you, I would give it to you because you are the real champion. Please take it. You need it more than me today." Eala stared at the medal, then at the girl. You could see the emotions moving across her face, the instinct to refuse, the understanding of what this small object meant to its owner, the awareness that accepting it meant accepting something far larger than medal and ribbon. She shook her head gently, mouthed the words, "No, no, it's yours." But the girl pressed it firmly into her palm, closed Eala's fingers around it, and left absolutely no space for negotiation. Then she looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You are a champion. Champions fall down, but they don't stay down." In the entire history of sport, the locker room speeches, the podium moments, the unforgettable post-match quotes, it is genuinely hard to think of a lesson that has landed with more quiet, piercing force than those 11 words, spoken by a 10-year-old girl on crutches, kneeling on a tennis court in Qatar, pressing her school medal into the palm of a sobbing world number 40. What happened next was the kind of scene that replays in your head for years. Eala looked down at the medal resting in her hand, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not dramatically, not theatrically, tectonically, the quiet, deep transformation of someone stepping from one version of herself into another. She lifted the medal and kissed it. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a marker, and signed both of her wristbands, the one soaked with the sweat and effort and invisible emotional weight of every single point she had played, and slid them onto the girl's wrists. She walked to the baseline, picked up her racket, signed the grip slowly and deliberately, and placed it in the girl's hands. The child held it to her chest like it was something sacred, because it was. Together, they helped each other up. The world number 40 reaching down to help a 10-year-old on crutches gather herself and rise. For one suspended moment, they stood side by side inside that arena, arms linked, facing a crowd that had risen into a thunderous, full stadium standing ovation. And then they walked toward the tunnel together, not as star and fan, as two people who had both fallen in their own way and refused to stay down. Within hours, the footage had traveled everywhere. The hashtag the Filipino community had been using all season, Laban Alex, surged across every platform, no longer just a rallying cry for victory, but a symbol of something bigger, resilience, connection, and the reminder that sometimes the most powerful triumph has nothing to do with the scoreboard. A second hashtag eclipsed it in speed. The girl with the medal. Tour players shared it. Retired legends shared it. Sports journalists who rarely let sentiment anywhere near their vocabulary shared it. The WTA's official accounts posted the clip with a caption that said simply, "This is tennis." In 12 hours, it generated more engagement than anything the organization had posted in the entire previous year. Eala's breakdown also opened a conversation the sport had been circling carefully for years: the mental health and emotional welfare of players who are built into national symbols before they are old enough to fully understand what that weight means. Young athletes loaded with sponsorships and expectations and the hopes of entire countries. Their victories go viral, but when the pressure breaks something inside them, the world tends to watch from a careful, uncomfortable distance. The WTA has been building support structures, but moments like Doha reveal the gap between what exists and what is actually needed. Next week in Dubai, Alex Eala will walk back onto a WTA 1000 court. The field will be deep. The pressure will be greater than it has ever been. The clip from Doha will follow her into every match she plays from this point forward. But somewhere in her bag, wrapped in whatever she found to protect it, is a small, slightly tarnished gold medal on a frayed red ribbon. And when the match tightens, when the mistakes creep in, and the legs go heavy, and the weight of everything starts pressing down, she will feel it there. And she will hear the voice of a 10-year-old girl who flew to Qatar on crutches just to kneel on a hard court and tell her the truest thing anyone has said in professional tennis this year: champions fall down. But they don't stay down. Tennis is often called the loneliest sport in the world. No teammates, no substitutions, no timeouts. You walk on alone. You compete alone. You face the outcome alone. But what happened in Doha last week reminded every single person watching, players, coaches, broadcasters, fans, that the loneliness is only a surface condition. Beneath it lies something invisible but unbreakable, a network of connection that makes every sacrifice, every early morning, every missed birthday, every anonymous hotel room mean something. Eala lost the match. The scoreboard confirms it. The rankings reflect it. The draw sheet verifies it. But she walked off that court carrying something no scoreboard will ever measure: the proof that what she does with her life inspired a little girl with a bandaged leg to cross borders and kneel on a professional court and say, "I'm proud of you." That is not a consolation prize. That is the entire point.